and welcome to this ATG webinar, UI and Dynamo. We'll be looking at user face functionality using the data shapes package. So again, I'm Patrick Podeyn. I'm a technical specialist here at ATG. I'm also an Autodesk certified professional for Revit architecture and structure. I like to consider myself a lightly seasoned Dynamo user and trainer. I'm still learning the ins and outs of coding in Python and looking to start learning how to provide and create Revit add-ins utilizing C#. I'm a seasoned amateur golfer. I used to be a negative handicap golfer playing quite consistently. And I'm also a pretty big foodie. I love food, specifically Italian food, Mexican food, and I will not say no to Indian curry. I am on Twitter. That is my handle, the notorious BIM. I'm pretty lucky that I was able to grab that handle when it was available. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. I like to put a lot of the workflows, tips and tricks and stuff that I like to put out for people to see what Dynamo is capable of, learn some tips and tricks about how to utilize certain techniques in Dynamo. So if you're not following me on LinkedIn, go ahead and give me a follow and learn some pretty awesome stuff about Dynamo. So kind of why are we here? We're here to learn about the UI capabilities for Dynamo and the Dynamo Player. As we remember, the Dynamo Player came out roughly in Revit 2018 1.3.4, roughly around that time frame. When that came out shortly after, a custom package called Data Shapes came out. We're going to learn what it is, and then we're also going to look at how we can incorporate these UI interfaces into our workflows. Some of the learning objectives, we're going to look at how to assess and implement data shapes nodes into existing workflows, develop fully customizable UI to elevate the end user experience, and we're going to apply additional information and functionality for the end users using data shapes. So first off, kind of what is data shapes? It's a custom package that was created by Mostafa El Iobi. This is from the Dynamo package description. It's a collection of nodes that aims to enhance the interaction with Revit and UI creation for Dynamo scripts. He does have a website that goes more in detail that documents all of the new things that he adds to the package, as well as covering Dynamaps. If you've heard of Dynamaps and you've used it before, it's pretty cool and awesome view extension that he has that allows you to pull in GIS building information into your models to utilize. So kind of looking at some of the UI, what we can produce here is we can create UI that kind of looks like this. It's fully customizable. This one here, we're giving the user the ability to select a specific file. In this instance, I want the user to go and look for specifically a Revit file, and then we can provide a description for it. Those two options right there, again, completely customizable. You can have it say whatever you want. We also have a cute little baby Yoda. If you've been watching The Mandalorian, or if you've seen it on Twitter or anything like that, we can provide logos and they'll be in that general region. We can also determine the words to use for the accept, the words to use for canceling this workflow, stuff like that. We can provide a list of options for users to select. In this instance, they're going to be selecting walls. We'll see this in the first example that we go to build. And again, those are all customizable. We'll look at how to build this into our workflows and how we can utilize the information in our workflows to provide that. Here, the powerhouse node, the node that kind of builds all of this for us, is the multiple input form ++ node. Here you can see all the various arrows pointing to what the input needs to be and what it's going to produce out. So that description, it's optional. Most of these nodes don't need to be fulfilled in order to run. The only ones that need to be fulfilled is the input and the toggle. Everything else is kind of optional. As you can see, they're written out as the inputs. You just need to provide the input itself, meaning for this example, I'm telling the user to go select the Revit file, and then the toggle tells it whether it's going to run or not. It's going to be controlled via a true or false Boolean. All right, so enough of PowerPoint. Let's get into the examples itself, and I'm going to stop my video because I'm going to be looking at another screen. So do that, and let's jump into Revit. So the first workflow we're going to go through, I've shown this off in a previous webinar. What we're going to do is there aren't any walls loaded into our file. There's just the one wall that we need to please Revit. So I just have this generic 5-inch wall, curtain wall, and then the one stacked wall in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to load in walls from a container file into our file using Dynamo, data shapes, and some other packages at our disposal. Also, too, you may see that my ribbon, my tabs are different colors. I am in the process of testing out a add-in for my good friend John Pearson, who works for Parallax team, utilizing this tabbed views, be able to change the colors per different project. Pretty cool thing to have. So go and take a look at it, and it's pretty awesome. All right, so let's get back into here. Again, we don't have any walls. We have a container file that's loaded off into another Revit file that has all the walls that are loaded into it. If you've been in my webinars before, one of my beginning ones, you may have seen this workflow before. We're using a couple of nodes out of the rhythm package, one to open a document file, one to grab all the wall types in that document, read the type marks, and then again, if you've been in either my my first webinar for Dynamo or my dictionary webinar for Dynamo, you may have seen this set of nodes here to grab elements based off of a specific key that we feed it. We're going to look at how we can convert that into some sort of UI for users to use, and then finally we are copying those elements and then closing the document. So one of the things I'll say first off when building and starting to get into workflows for UI is make sure it works first. Make sure it works with kind of, before you start trying to apply user interface to it. If you're a beginner, if you're quite advanced, you know, if you feel like you understand it well enough that you can start applying UI to it, definitely go for it. But I would recommend first making sure that it does in fact work prior to implementing UI. So what we're going to do first is we're going to build a user interface to allow the user to select the file path. And we're going to go to the data shapes package here. And we're going to start with the node that's going to produce it all for us, which is the multiple input form plus. So I'll place that on my canvas here. And again, as we saw in the PowerPoint, we have a couple of inputs. Again, if you hover on these inputs, most of the time they'll tell you what it's looking for. So if I hover on this description, it's looking for a string. The default value is blank, so it's not going to provide anything. Logo, you can provide a JPEG or a PNG or a GIF. I say GIF, I stand on that side of the acronym and how to say it. Button text, this is going to be the option as far as what you want to tell people when to proceed to the next section. Similarly, like saying okay. The inputs are going to be where we provide that information for the user to select a file. Again, the toggle has to be set to true. Right now it's set to false and it's looking for a Boolean, so true false value, or if you're more familiar with the design script portion, you can use a 0 or a 1. You can provide a link to a help option with a string, a cancel button text. I would strongly recommend incorporating a cancel button more times than not, just so that way users can kind of get out of the UI without having to channel through each and every single UI interface, which at the end we'll kind of go through how to use a series of if statements to determine if the next UI is going to be ran or not. Max height and width, those are kind of optional in here. You can play around with those. They are looking for an integer value. you can input those into there. A lot of this is going to be playing around with it, experimenting, seeing what they do, specifically the height and the width. You'll probably have to play around with that quite a bit in order to get it to show all of the information that you want to show. Another thing that I'll mention when working with anything user interface is you're going to have to undo a lot in Revit, especially if you're creating elements. You're going to have to toggle the toggle from true or false quite a bit, sometimes even closing out of the entire workflow to get it back to up and running. But once you get it up and running and good to go, you should be sailing from there. It's just going to take some time undoing when you're testing it out the first time. All right, so let's get into this. So we're going to be going into the input tab here under the data shapes, and here he has a list of nodes to provide input. What we're specifically looking for is we're going to provide a file path. So if I click on that file path, it's going to drop the node on my canvas for me, and pretty self-explanatory. It's looking for an input name. This is going to be the name that is going to be provided. Let's go back to here. It's going to be this information here. That's the input name, and then the button text here is going to be what's read here. So whatever you want to put in as a string. So mine is going to say select container file, and then specifically I want the user to go and search for a Revit file. I have not found a way yet to determine only showing .rbt extensions, anything like that. I have not found a method to do so just yet. So just explicitly lay out here what they're looking for, specifically a Revit file. All right, so for input name, I'm going to create a code block. Double click on my canvas, start with a apostrophe or a quote, and then type in select container file, semicolon, and if you continue on followed by another semicolon, it'll just break it for you. So if I type in Revit file with a semicolon, I type it like that, it automatically knows to break it to the next line here. Default path, you can specify a default path if you want users to be taken to a specific path, maybe somewhere on your server or somewhere else. However, when they click on the button, it's just going to take them to wherever they were last at. So I'll tie input name, this into my input name and this into my button text, and we are pretty much good to go for this file path. I'm going to get rid of this node here so that way it doesn't run. So again, I can tie file path into, or file path input into inputs as anytime we create any set of UI. If we have more than one, we'll want to use a list create node to create a list of those inputs, and then we'll feed that list create node into here. For the toggle, we need to fill it with a true value, otherwise it's not going to run. If we try to run it, it's going to give us an error, user inputs list, set toggle to true. All right, I got it. I will set it to true. So we'll look for the true false Boolean. Place it here, set it to true, tie that into my toggle, and let's just see what it does. I'll hit run, and up pops this UI for me to select my container file. So I'll select my Revit file, wherever it is located, Revit, walls container, open, right? It'll see it, it'll read it there. I'll hit set values. Again, it's going to kind of reappear. This is kind of one of those things where it's going to happen quite a bit whenever you're testing and stuff like that. So again, I'll just say Revit file, container, open, set values. All right, we can see it listed there. A couple other inputs to kind of take note of: was run equals true and was canceled equals false. Again, at the end, we'll cover a series of if statements, how to utilize these true false values in order to determine if the next set of UI is run or not. So what we could do from here is set the user inputs into file path, because this is looking for a file path there, and say we want to include a description. So what we can do is we can include a string. So again, I'll type in a code block. I'll type in this is going to be the wall copy machine. Break that, tie that into description. Button text optional, so it's set to set values as you saw in the original UI. I do like to include a cancel button. cancel there, tie that. And actually, before I tie this into there, so I've run this, it works. I have to reset it. How I reset it is I have to toggle this to false. So I'll set it to false, run again. It's going to reappear, right? It's going to return back to this state. I can now set it to true, hit run again. Anytime you feed in any additional information into this as well, and you hit run, it's going to rerun the UI for you. So you can see there, while copy machine is turned on, Revit file, container, hit open, set values. You could also see cancel was applied there. So I'm going to tie that into my file path. Let's just drag this a little bit closer. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to set this node to freeze. That's set to freeze as well, because I don't want it to copy. I want to see the information that I'm going to work with out of this node. Once it looks at the document and grabs all of the element types of wall type in my project, and then I'm going to start to build my list to select from. All right, so let's go ahead and hit F5 and kind of just see what happens. So again, it ran. I didn't make any additional changes to this, so the UI is not going to pop up again. It's going to continue to run. We can see that it opened the document file. This list populated with all of my walls. Now what we want to do is we want to build a list view. So in the inputs, we're going to look for list view data. We're going to drop that, place it on our canvas, and we're going to look at some of the nodes and inputs in there. We're going to basically replace this group of nodes with this set of UI here. So here we have an input name. We can provide that name there. We have keys and values, similarly to the dictionary keys and values. So the keys are what's going to be seen, what we're going to pick as we want, and then the values are going to be what is going to be delivered off of that key. And so in a list, they have to be aligned 1-to-1. So we'll have two lists. We'll have 0 will be aligned to 0. So whatever the key is for 0, the value for 0 will be picked. We can determine a height. We can highlight this in view, and so if a user selects on the element in the list view, it'll actually take them to that actual location. It'll actually highlight it, as well as you probably want to use these two in tandem. They're both set to false by default. So if you want to highlight the actual element that a user is selecting and display it, you want to set both of these to true. Set element count, and so they're underneath the value. Let me go back to my PowerPoint so we can see this. There will be a number applied at the bottom to indicate the amount of items that are in that list. And so this is basically what we're going to create here. The default value indices, this is giving you the ability to kind of have elements already pre-checked. Notice in this UI here, nothing is checked. If you input values into here, so the specific indexes of the elements that you want already pre-checked, and you supply the indexes for those items will automatically be checked, so the user does not have to go through and check those items. We want to sort the items. It's going to be set to true if you want them to be sorted, and then show the element ID. Those two options are set to true. All right, so we want to start to build our keys and our values. So if we look at this workflow here, we have, it's reading the type mark of the walls, and in the walls, the type marks are listed out here. These are going to kind of be my my keys and values. And so I need to build this out a little bit more. What I want to do here is I want to grab the element name and apply it to the end of this mark here. So what I'm going to do first is I want to grab the element name, element.name. Also, you really want to be in manual mode most of the time whenever you're running the data shapes UI. So I'll tie element into element. It's going to build our element name. I'm going to then flatten it just for good measure. Then I'm going to create a list. So notice here, this isn't a completely flattened list. So I'm going to apply this flatten list to here. Drag these out. I'm gonna have to drag this out a little bit further. And I'm going to create a list. So I want this to be first, I want the mark to be first, and then the name of the wall to be second. And let's hit run, let's kind of see what happens. So we have two lists here. We have a list of our marks and a list of our walls. What we're going to do next is we're going to transpose this list. If you've been in any of my previous webinars as well, I kind of go over the reason why I'm going to transpose this list in order to join these two sets of strings together. So I'm going to transpose that list, use the string.join node. So I have a separator and a string. This is going to be my string. My separator is going to be a space dash a space. And let's hit run and kind of see what happens. And so we can see there that it joined the two strings together. Let me just show you, for example, if we did not use this list.transpose node, hit run or F5, notice how it just takes this item, joins it with this item, joins it with that, that, and that. And so transposing this list is going to convert it into sublists of the item at 0 and the item at 1. If we had additional lists incorporated into this, it would just be applied as such. So I'll tie this list transpose back into it. If I hit run, we get the output that we're looking for. Again, I'm going to flatten this for good measure. And we have a flattened list. All right, so these are my keys. These are what the user is going to see when they're selecting the actual walls that they want to bring over into their project. And the actual values themselves are going to be the walls themselves, which is derived back here. So I'm going to get rid of this section here, move this section over here, and let's start building out this workflow. So again, these are my keys, so I can just tie this into my keys. These are what the user is going to see again, and then my values. My values are going to be my walls. This node here is providing the actual walls for us. This information here, we're just building out the keys. So I'll tie element into values, and let's give it an input name, call it select walls. I'll tie that into there. It's going to automatically sort, and you can kind of see what's going to happen when it sorts, and then I want it to show the element ID. So once I do this, again, I need another multiple input form ++ node in order to actually build the UI. This is going to be my input. I'll tie input into inputs here. My toggle, I'll set that to true. I'm not going to hit run just yet. Description, going to go back to my previous section, copy and paste this. I'm doing this just for cleanliness. You could definitely take this and tie it all the way into that node. Tie that into there. Let's move these out just a little bit further. Get some more room to play around with. And let's provide a cancel dialog with a code block. I'll tie that into there. All right, so I'm going to save this graph at this point, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just close, or actually, I need to close this document first. So this is another thing that you're going to need to go through as well. I need to close the document first before I do anything else, otherwise Dynamo is going to get angry with me. So I'm going to tie this back over here, tie document into this document, because this document is still open in the background. If I close Dynamo, it's still technically open. I want it to be closed, so that way, again, Dynamo does not get angry at me. And save, I do not want to save it. I'll hit F5. Again, it's going to run. We can see here that the select walls options are selected there. We can see that it sorted it, so P1, P10, P11, P12, so on and so forth are listed there. Again, you can select any of these values, select all if you want to select all, anything like that. And then if we hit set values, we'll see that this is going to output, or it won't. Let me verify that it closed. All right, it closed. What I'm going to do is close that, delete that, save, close out of this. Let's go back into Dynamo, make sure there is no undo, so no transactions were made, no handshakes were done. Open that workflow back up. And we can see our workflow is still here. Now we're going to hit F5 again to run the workflow. Again, it's going to start with that first UI to select the Revit file, walls container. I'll hit open. We'll hit set values. And then up pops is going to be the keys that we had set. So the mark number followed by the name of the wall followed by the element ID. So if I want to select a few walls here, again, you can make this suffice for your standards in your office. I'll hit set values there. And if we look at the options, we can see all of the walls that we had just selected are listed here. So now that we have this set, we can supply it to our elements because this node, this document.copy from documents, is looking for the source document. And so this is pointing to the document that we just opened in the background, which is our container file, and then the actual elements we're looking to copy. I'm going to unfreeze this, tie this user inputs into elements. Looking at all of this, we look good. All right. Again, remember, there are no walls. There are just one wall per wall type. We're going to hit F5 here. We're going to verify that it completed. I am still in the wall command. Again, it's going to pop up, select Revit file, select container, open, set values, which walls I want it to pick, set values. It wouldn't be a Dynamo example without a crash. All right, so we're going to close that. We're going to hit save here. I'm going to close out of this entirely. I don't believe I need to close out of Revit. Reopen this. All right, let's hit run and see what it does. Select Revit file, walls container, hit open, set values, pick our walls, set values again. We can see that it did actually copy those walls over and it closed our document for us. So if I go back into my Revit workflow or my Revit project, I can see that those walls have been loaded into my project. It actually ran a second time, as you can see, appended by that number 2. So you can kind of see firsthand the trial and error that you're going to need to go through in order to see that this works successfully. So now that we have this working, let's save it, close out of this, close out of Dynamo, and see how it interacts with the Dynamo Player. I'm going to undo those 2 Dynamo runs, make sure we don't have any walls in our project. We're going to go to the Manage tab, Dynamo Player. Wait for it to open up. Hit the refresh. Let me make sure I'm in the right folder. UI and Dynamo, copy walls, excellent. All right, so now we just hit the play button here. Script is running. First time you run it in Dynamo Player, it's gonna take some time the first time, but once you run it after that, it's going to kind of start up right away. Again, select container file, select our Revit file, which is that one there. Hit open, set values, and then it's gonna bring up all the walls I want to bring over. Or give me the option to hit set values. If we go to the architecture tab, go to wall, we can see all of our walls are now placed in our project. So we have that process done. A couple speed bumps in the road, specifically when we're opening up a file in the background. We need to be very careful that if we are closing out of our Dynamo graph, that we need to close that document that is open in the background. So kind of just keep that in mind. But now we have a fully functional UI to go along with our copy walls that we can now give off to our users. All right, let's go to the next example. So I have the sample file open, and our goal here is to provide a UI interface to tell users to select rooms in order to place an exterior or an interior elevation. And I'm not going to go over the workflow, how to build the workflow itself. We're going to look at just how to build the UI for this workflow. So we'll go into Dynamo. Also, if you don't have the super duper internal origin hidifier, I highly suggest that you get it. It's a free add-in from the Parallax team. Hides that pesky internal origin. Hides it everywhere, and it has a cute puppy on it as well, so get it. All right, so let's go ahead and open. Again, this is a workflow that I have created, and I know that it works. Now we just need to apply UI to it. So I'll hit open there. Kind of a brief overview. I'm using some custom nodes out of the rhythm package to create an elevation marker and then place and then apply the actual marker at an index. And then I am going through and renaming them and setting the name of the interior elevation to the room name. This is an example that I'll go over in another webinar in the future, or I'll post a video kind of explaining this workflow to create interior elevations. All right, so let's kind of look and see what this workflow is going to do. Let me drag Dynamo off to the side here. I'm going to hit run. It's going to allow me to select rooms. It's going to select just rooms itself. I want to select those rooms there, hit finish. And it's going to place an interior elevation. If I go to this interior elevation, it just names the name of that view to the room number and or actually a number corresponding 1, 2, 3, 4, followed by the name and number of the room. All right, so it works. Let's add some UI to it. So let me undo from there. Go back into here. Again, we need to go to data shapes, and we're going to go to UI, and we're going to use the multiple input form ++ node. Again, this is going to be our main node that we're using. We need to start building the inputs. For this input alone, we are going to be using the select model elements input. Is it selection? I am sorry, it is under selection. Select model elements. There is one to select linked elements. There's also one to select model elements in a specific order if you want to have your users pick model elements in a specific order. So I'll place this select model elements data on my canvas. Look at the inputs. We have input name, that is going to be driven by a string. Button text, again, this is just saying select model elements. We're going to change that. And then we have a category filter, so we can determine the type of category that the users will only be allowed to select rather than having them select everything in our model. We can actually determine the category that they'll be selecting in our Revit environment. And then if you want to give your users the ability to select just a single element, you can toggle this to true, and the user will only be allowed to select one element at a time. For this example, we're going to leave this on false. All right, so for our input name, we can kind of list instructions or kind of a description as to what this is going to do. And so I'm just going to list out here, this is going to place an interior elevation at the selected rooms. Place an interior elevation at the selected rooms. Gave me an error because it's looking for me to finish the string. As soon as I do that, it's happy again, no more red. Button text. Going to start it again with a apostrophe, select rooms, end it, followed by a semicolon, and we're good to go there. Category filter. We're going to go and grab the categories node. And we're going to look for rooms. Rooms there. If you want to grab it and put it inside of design scripts, you can write it in using this, Revit.category by name rooms. If you wanted to include it in design script, because sometimes I believe that I think it happens from 2019 to 2020 that another couple or the indexes of these categories kind of shifts a little bit. And so if you want to completely remove that from happening out of your workflow, you can incorporate it in design script, and you can utilize this written out version here, and then this is just going to be the category that you input. So I'll tie this input into my input name, button text, tie this category into my category filter. I have my output as an input, so I tie input into inputs, or the output of that input into inputs. Want to create my description. I'll call this place an interior elevation machine. I'll tie that into the description there. Toggle, true, false. So I'll type in true, get the true, false Boolean, set it to true. Again, make sure you're in manual mode before inputting this into there. And then cancel button, cancel. Or if you want to be more creative, you can put something else in there. All right, so now that we have that done, I'm going to set this to freeze so that way it doesn't run. I want to see what this UI is going to look like, so I'll hit run here. Place an interior elevation at the selected room. All right, let me drag Dynamo off to the side. Select rooms. I'll do a window selection over everything, and notice that it's just going to select my rooms. You do have the finish option at the top with the multiple checked. So always, you can include in here as a reminder for users to be sure to hit finish at the top in order to execute or finish that selection. Once they do that, we can hit set values, go back into Dynamo, and we can see our rooms are now selected here. So now that we have that done, what we can do is we can take our user inputs and tie it into rooms. So a really cool trick that I learned from watching a webinar, I forget who was presenting it. I believe it was John, and he found it from somebody else. But anyways, if you hover on this output and you hold down Shift and control and select the output, you can move the entire, everything that is connected to this, that is coming out of this node and tying into the other inputs, and you can move that to another output. So again, let me kind of just redo that. So I'll hover on the output, I'll hold down Shift, click on it, and then I can move it. I'm still holding Shift. I'll click to end that selection, and we can get rid of that. All right, let me drag this closer in. I'm gonna hit save at this point. Going to close out of this workflow because I want to make sure I have a fresh start. Let me go back into Revit, make sure no Dynamo had occurred, nothing was run, so it looks like Dynamo did run. Let's undo all of that. Go back into that workflow that has the UI. Let's hit run, let's make sure it works in this environment first, so select rooms. Select rooms, we'll hit finish, we'll hit set values there, and we can see that it worked and it placed those elevations. All right, so it worked in this environment. Let's see if it works in Dynamo Player. So I'll close out of here. Do I want to save changes? Nope, I know it works. Let's undo again. Let's go and open up Dynamo Player, change folders, and let's hit play on here. Again, whenever you're first starting it up, it's going to take some time to run, and then it'll eventually pop up. Select rooms, select all my rooms here, hit finish, and then set values, and it places the actual interior elevation itself. So now we have another workflow that we can push out to our interiors group if they want to quickly place interior elevations per room. Again, this workflow is there to kind of help your users get 80–90% of the way there. They may need to delete some interior elevations, create additional ones, for instance, like for this wall here. But again, we're getting them halfway there, and we have a really easy user interface that our users can use to run this workflow and be consistent and efficient with it. All right, let's get into the last workflow. We have about 20 minutes left, so I'll try to get through this one as quickly as I can. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to read a Excel file, and we're going to create levels off of it. This is a workflow that I showcased in previous webinars and trainings if you have been a part of those trainings. And we're actually going to look at it incorporating two UIs into this one, where we're going to first create the level, and then we're going to ask the user if they want to create a floor plan and a RCP for it. So we'll look at incorporating two UIs into one. So let's go ahead and open up Dynamo. We'll hit open. Start, and so pretty simple workflow. What we're going to do is we're just going to add on to this. So in the first example, again, we looked at how to give users the ability to go and select a file path. We're going to do the same thing here. We'll go to data shapes. We'll go to UI, multiple form, multiple input form plus plus is the node to run all of the UI for us. Next thing is input. We want to tell the user to go find a file path. So we'll use the file path data. And for our input name, we're going to select Excel file to create levels off of. Followed by the button text. Select Excel, input name, button text. Again, we're going to tie this file path input into this input here. Again, we're in manual mode here. Description, create Revit levels plus views. So we'll tie that into the description. Toggle, we're going to look for that true false boolean. Set it to true, tie that to toggle, provide a cancel option. And let's see if that works. Let me just delete that node there to make sure it doesn't run. So I'll hit run here. Select Excel, create levels, or wherever your Excel file is located. We'll hit set values, and we can see that's going to provide the file path. We can now tie user inputs into file path here. Just drag this over. And I'm going to freeze this node, as this is the node to create the levels. We'll hit run, select Excel, create levels again, set values. We can see that it pulled all the information from that, transposing it to separate the numbers for the actual elevation and then the names themselves. That's how it's listed in my Excel file. And then from here, it's going to create levels in my project. All right, so for this next portion, what I'm going to do is unfreeze this. We're going to have to do quite a bit of undoing in order to test to see what happens. I'm going to disconnect these nodes here, drag it off to the side because we're going to utilize those later because we're going to determine the levels that we wish to create off of. So I'm going to hit run here just to make sure that this runs. It's created all the levels here. Now what I want to do is give the user the ability to pick and choose which levels they want to create a floor plan and a reflected ceiling plan off of. So again, we're going to start with the multiple input form ++ node. I'm going to drag this off to the side and we're going to start building our UI. So I want to give the user a list to select from, so be able to select, either all of these or maybe a few of these, all but one, all but five. We're going to use the list view data node. Again, we're going to provide it keys, values, and an input name. So the actual keys, or the keys that we're going to provide is just the level name. So we're going to get the element name because those are Revit levels. Element name, tie that into level, tie string into my keys, and then the actual values themselves are going to be the levels, because if we look at these nodes here, this one is to create floor plans by level, this one's to create ceiling plans by level, and it's looking for specifically a level, so our value has to be a level. Can't be anything else, otherwise it's not going to work. The input name itself, let's give it a name, call it select levels to create views from. Input name there. And then we're going to add another UI to this. We're going to give the user a toggle between a yes or a no. Do they want to create ceiling plans for all of these views? Do they not want to create ceiling plans for all of these views? You could utilize this list data again to give the user the ability to, maybe they want to have a floor plan for some, but not all of them need a reflected ceiling plan, and you want to give them the ability to select the actual reflected ceiling plan, or maybe they need to have, or all of these are going to have an RCP applied to it, kind of whichever method you want to go through. You'll be able to apply it. For this example, I want to show how to incorporate two sorts of UI and how to incorporate it into a list in order to see how it works in the multiple form ++. So we'll look for the radio button. And if we look at this node, has an input name, same thing, keys and values, and then a default value index. So the default value index is going to be which one is going to be checked by automatic. So what I'm going to do for my input name, we're going to call this make RCPs. And then for our keys and our values, my keys are going to be what's read, my values are going to be what's going to be delivered. So I want to give it the key yes or no to create a RCP, and then the value that I'm going to use is a true or false, and we're going to use that true or false with an if statement. So I'm going to create a code block here, create a list of strings, yes, no, and that list with a square bracket followed by another list. Yes is going to be true, no is going to be false. Keys, values, and I want index 0 to be checked. So if I tie in a code block of 0, that just means whenever the user gets into this, the first option is always going to be checked, which is yes. If you tied in a 1, no would be checked. If you tied in 2, it wouldn't work. It'd probably provide an error. So make sure that this number corresponds to the correct index. So index 0 is yes, and index 1 is no. All right, so we have these set. Let's create a list. So we'll use the list create. We'll expand that to add a secondary option. So we'll tie list view input into the top one and the radio buttons at the bottom. This is going to determine in which order they're going to show up in your user interface. So my list view data is going to be first and my radio buttons are going to show up second. So we'll tie this list into our inputs here. We need to provide a toggle. Again, we're going to provide the toggle as a true. So you can create a code block, type in the word true or 1 in order to enact it as a true value of 0 or false for those values. Another code block here for a cancel. And then provide a description. Create Revit levels plus views. Again, you can tie it back to the original one that we created. Tie that into the description. All right, so we created levels. Let's see what happens when we run it. And it's going to bring up this UI that allows us to select the levels that we wish to make a view off of. If I want to select all of them, I can select all of them except for that parapet level. I do not want to create a view for that. Make RCPs, I definitely, yes, I want to create levels. So if we look at this user input, we can see that it's going to create all of these. We are going to output all of these levels for us to input into these two nodes here. And we have a true value at the end. So what I'm going to do here is create a code block. This is going to be design script for getting an item at an index. So I'll create a variable followed by a square bracket and then the index I wish to grab. So index 0, x, index 1. This is the same as if we did the, where did it go? Get item at index. This is virtually the same thing, except this is in a design script version. So I'll tie my inputs into here. So again, my index 1, which is going to be out here, is going to be my true false statement. So what I'm going to do here is create an if statement. So if, we're going to do this conditional statement. We're going to test. This is going to be our test here. And then if true, right, we want it to return all of these levels because the user has said they want to make RCPs for it. False, what we can do is we can do a number of things. I'm going to use a list.null item. So I'm going to provide pass through a null, so that way the ceiling plan view will not run. So list.null item out of the Wombat Dynamo package, and that's going to be provided out of my false. If I hit run again, I can see the result. So it's passing through a true. So it's going to return the actual levels themselves that I want, that I can then pass into my ceiling plans. And then again, I want it to create levels or floor plans off of those levels. So it's going to create floor plans, and then it's going to create ceiling plans. If it was returned as a false, then this would not work. So I'll drag this off to the side. We'll hit run. We can see all of those floor plans appear and all of those ceiling plans appear. All right, so we have it good and running. Let's save this. Let's go test it out and see what it looks like in Dynamo Player. I'll undo that. Let's undo back to the beginning. Go to the Manage tab. We'll go to Dynamo Player. We'll navigate to that directory, create levels. Create level start, we'll hit play. Wait for this to start turning. And this will pop up. So select Excel file to create levels off of. Select Excel, we'll create levels. We'll hit open, set values. And then it's going to bring up this dialog box to create views off of from those levels. So I'll hit select all, and I want to make RCPs. I'll hit set values, and I can see that it has created those levels and those views for me. If I go to this floor plan, I can see that the associated level is floor level 5. All right. We have about 5 minutes left. We'll probably go a little bit over. Just want to cover this real quick. Open up Dynamo again. Hit open. I'm going to open this one and just explain through the logic in this workflow. So this first workflow here, what it is it's giving the user the ability to toggle off of 3 options. So I am giving them the ability through a list view data. So option 1, option 2, option 3 are my keys, and then the actual index of which I want them to pick from. So 0, 1, and 2. And the reason I am providing a value of 0, 1, and 2 is for this portion at here. So provided that they pick maybe 1 and 2, it's going to grab the UI that I want to run for 1 and 2. So if they pick 1, it's going to provide this UI here. If they pick 1 and 2, it'll provide this one. If they pick or 0 and 2, and then 1 will provide here. Also here is this toggle if true control, and we can talk about that here in a second. So let's go ahead and hit run on that one. Let me freeze this one here, so that way those ones don't run. Same thing for this one down here. All right, so let's hit run, kind of see what it does, see what this UI looks like. Oops, set that to true. Hit run. So I have the ability to pick option 1, 2, or 3. If I pick all 3, go to the next one, it's going to provide me all 3. So a text option, a slider, and then the option 3 with the radio buttons. And then it'll output those for me. All right, let's talk about this portion here. So here you're going to want to pay close attention to was run and was canceled. So I ran it and it succeeded and went through, so it's going to give me a true value here. Was canceled is going to read as a false. And so I'm using that true value here as the was run or was canceled as my first test. And so if it's giving me a false, I want it to continue on. And so it's going to provide it with a true value here. If this was canceled, this would read as true. And so I don't want it to proceed any further after that. So I'm going to provide it a blank list. Let me hit false here, run again. So if I have it set to false, again, we can see was run was set to false and was canceled is set to false. Toggle this back to true, hit run. And let's say they hit the cancel button. In my instance, I just have the 1 here. So if I hit cancel there, we can see was run is true and was canceled is set to true. Notice the other UI did not pop up. So let's look at this and evaluate. So because this is set, the was canceled is set to true, it's going to provide it a blank value, meaning it's going to kind of stop it in its tracks there. And so the other options are not going to continue further on because it doesn't know if it's a true or false value. Toggle it to false again. So if I toggle that to false, it says set toggle to true. It provides 2 falses. It's going to provide a false value here. Again, this is going to be my second stage. So was canceled is set to false, which I want it to do. So it's going to provide the value for was run here, which in this case is a false. So the result is going to be a false, which is going to be going through here as the test. And then it's going to look at this true or false value here. If it's a false, it's going to pass through this. If it's a true, it's going to pass through, again, this was run again. And the reason I have this third instance here is when the user clicks the X button at the top. So if I set this to true, hit run, and they close out of this here, it still throws a true false. I talked to Mustafa. He said he's going to look at incorporating whenever a user does hit the X value, that it's going to report another false value. So that way we won't need this because this is going to provide the user input. It's an empty list. List is empty, so it's a true. So if it's a true value, I don't want to provide anything else. But if this reports as a false, I want it to continue on. And so that is going to be set there. All right, so that's going to do it for this workflow. We did hit 11 o'clock. Let's go through the questions. So question for later, I would like to be able to create a single UI that has options that change with the interface itself to offer the user new and different options. For instance, having the user select an item of the drop-down menu and then give them a new input option with the same UI. I have been only able to do this with multiple input interfaces, one after another. So that's going to kind of be the same case. You could utilize this workflow here where you give them an option as the drop-down and there is a value associated to each one of those. And if they pick, say, option 2, it's going to run the next section for option 2. I hope that answers that question for you. If not, we can get together after this and kind of work through that together. Is data shapes the only package required for this graph? I believe that was 1017. That was for the first workflow. I'll have the workflows that you'll be able to download with the actual custom packages, but for all the UI that you're going to run, it's going to require data shapes. All right. I hope that answers that one. Why does it say run completed with errors? So the workflow with the copy walls, the run completed with errors. So if you're looking for the wall type, a stacked wall does not have a type mark, and that's the parameter that I'm reading. And so that's the cause for that run completed with errors at the end is because that node did have an error in it because stacked walls do not have a type mark. And in my, I want to say one of my first webinars, it is out there, I believe on YouTube. You can go ahead and go through that webinar and I have an explanation as to why that is providing an error. And then I use a list.clean node in order to, or actually a list replace null value. So I replace that null value, which is the stacked wall, with the word stacked wall. What are you using the alignment buttons in Dynamo? So I'm assuming you're referring to these as well as these here. So this is from a custom view extension from Monocle, and it allows you to use the alignment lines here or you can use them up here in order to align your nodes all one-to-one. So I selected all of these. If I click this up here, you can see that it aligns them. I can also utilize these here in order to kind of evenly space them out. So that's what they're used for, and they come from the Monocle view extension. What does conditional data input do? So the conditional data input, so it's actually this one here, what it does is just allows the user to either toggle between one or the other. Let me actually unfreeze this. We'll set that to true. We'll hit run. And so if I have it set to slider, it's not going to allow me to pick the second option, but I can adjust the slider. If I toggle it to text, notice that that slider portion disappears and then text is set for me to utilize. And so that's what that conditional input data gives users to do. So either one or the other. And so your options are slider or text, which is what you saw there. And then the options, so 0 and 1, so you want these to align. So the input sliders aligned with that slider as the option, and then the text input is aligned to that one there. And then the default option index, so you can set it to 0 or 1 depending on which one you want to be defaulted. All right, is the only way to select multiple to use window select, or can you select while holding control like typical Revit process? So I believe you can. You can still select multiple objects by holding down the control when the select multiple model elements or select single elements is set to false, allowing users to select multiple elements. I believe you can also toggle the control or hit the control button to select multiple elements. So say you didn't want to select all the rooms in one selection, you want to select one room from one area and a couple rooms from another area, I believe the control will work. Where can I grab the Revit add-in that you showed? So This is underneath the Parallax add-in tab, the tabbed views. I'm testing it out for him. I believe he does have a version out there for you to purchase. And then the Super Duper internal origin heightifier, these are both on the, or actually this one is on the Autodesk App Store, and I believe this one is through their website. I might be wrong. It could also be in the App Store. If there aren't any other questions, that's going to do it for this webinar. I apologize for going 8 minutes over. I hope you guys found this useful. I am on LinkedIn, I am on Twitter, I am on the Dynamo forum. So if you want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me through any one of those platforms. And let's build some awesome stuff together and see how we can save some time for everybody. All right, thank you so much, everybody. Have a good one.